What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we got a great video coming for you. We're going to be going over 5 different wide receiver press releases, when to use each press release, and then we're going to talk about the technique behind each press release. This is going to help you out in every single situation that you'll face off the line. So I hope this video helps you guys out, but also before we get in this video, fellas, we're coming out to 15 different states this offseason for 2-day long QB and wide receiver camp. So check out that very first link in the description below. We're coming out to San Francisco, California, Miami, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, Charlotte, North Carolina. Then we'll be coming out to Portland, Oregon, Dallas, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Buffalo, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas. Then we'll be coming out to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Michigan, Boise, Idaho, and Los Angeles, California. So again, check out that very first link in the description below if you're interested, fellas. Let's get started with this video. All right, guys, so the first release out of 5 that we are going to be discussing is something called a vertical wide step release. So a vertical wide step release is something you would use against this specific type of DB coverage, or maybe he's head up. You could use this when he is maybe outside shade or inside shade, depending on what your stance is. Stephon Diggs comes out in this like stance switch where the quarterback is to the inside, but he has his outside foot up. Now, why wide receivers line up like this is just simply to be able to use releases that they might be more comfortable with, or if they are running a route off of a specific step. So you see this a lot of out of like wide receivers out of the slot. They'll line up with the stance switch if they're running like a 2-step slant or maybe like a 1-step like flat route, something of that nature. But it's either for the press release or it is for the steps of the route. But I don't recommend doing this if your coach does not design this. Okay, so now this wide step release is pretty much exactly how it sounds. You want to step with your foot that is furthest back. So this could either be the foot is left foot. If your inside foot is up, it would be your right foot in this specific case. But you're releasing opposite of the step. But the reason why it is vertical is because of how the DB is actually lined up. So let's talk about this. So anytime that you come up to the line of scrimmage when it comes to picking a press release, coming up with a plan off the line, it's all based on what the DB is doing. Where is the DB lined up? And AKA, what's his leverage? Is he inside leverage? Is he head up right in my face like this example? Or is he outside leverage? And then the second thing that you want to identify is the distance between the two of you. So obviously Diggs, he's off the ball, and this DB is kind of maybe about a yard off the line of scrimmage. So we got about 2 yards of space between me and him, and he's head up right in front of my face. So Diggs is running a fade route. If we got head up press coverage, we would obviously love to take an outside release on a fade route. That's a given. In any situation, we would love an outside release. But if you're running a route like, for example, a post route, I would say that you would love to take an inside release. It's all really based on this guy's leverage. If you had to run a post route and he was lined up inside shade, you would attack him and take the outside release. It's just all based on leverage and based on distance. So now a wide step release is where you step with the foot that is back in your stance, and it's exactly how it sounds. You are essentially stepping wide outside of this DB's frame, stepping almost all the way to this like far left lane, if you will. I think of this wide step release, or even, like a jab step release with the inside foot, is think of the DB, you got 3 driving lanes. You got the furthest outside lane, you got the middle lane, and then you got the furthest inside lane. If I want him to move to that inside lane, I actually have to step to that inside lane to try to make him to move. Now, how Diggs is able to get a lot of explosion off of this, you see how he takes this like subtle step with his front foot. They call that like a prep step, which is essentially just a step in place to create explosion. So you're in your stance, let's say your right foot is up, you take that step with your front foot so you could explode and generate some power and step wide outside of his frame with a little bit more explosion. What you could also do as a wide receiver, and we're going to talk about this later in some different releases, is something called a kick step, where you take this back foot, you kick it as quick as you can behind your front foot, then you explode up into the wide step release. It is very, very tough on this type of release if you're a wide receiver and you come out in a stance completely flat-footed and not being able to move. So we need to generate some power with either a prep step or a kick step. Now, when he steps wide, remember how I said when it comes to picking a press release, it's based on the distance the DB is away from us, but also his leverage. So in this case, he's 2 yards away. So if he's got 2 yards away and Diggs, let's say he stays right here, but he throws this wide step and he stays behind the line of scrimmage, right? He just steps over here, if you will. Let's say that DB jumps inside. Diggs still has to get vertical from that point, and that DB could cut off the angle. That's why the DB is playing with this kind of distance from Diggs. They call this catch technique, because what he's hoping that Diggs does is does a lot of moves behind the line of scrimmage, not really attacking vertical, not really closing distance, and then when he takes off and runs, this guy can recover, aka catch him, get hands, and disrupt the route. So with my release, I have to make sure that I attack vertical when I step with this thing. It's almost like this step is at like a 45-degree angle rather over at a 90-degree angle. Now, this can be a little bit different when you decide to do this wide step. You could still do the same exact wide step, but let's say you're on the ball and that DB's right in front of your face. You don't need to close any distance because the DB's already closed it for us. So you could take a more lateral step with this wide step. So a wide step, a vertical wide step release is a great release to use when you have a DB who's maybe about 1 to 2 yards away, and you maybe could do it out of the stance switch like we said, or just a regular stance when trying to take an inside release. So let's play this full speed one more time. Great job by Diggs closing the space, giving that move, and winning on this fade route. Okay, so now next example is going to be for something called a mandatory outside release fade when you have an outside shade press coverage DB. So obviously when I run a fade route, I talk about this a lot with the different routes that we go over on our page. Remember, first two things when it comes down to picking a press release off the line is we're looking for the DB's leverage, and we are looking for the distance between me and him. So in this case, this guy's pressed maybe about like a yard away, right? We're obviously on the ball in this example, but he is lined up outside shade. So when a DB is lined up outside shade, he's trying to take away the outside. Last example, that DB was head up. We didn't know if he was trying to take away the inside or the outside. He was doing a good job at disguising it because he was head up. But in this case, he is completely outside shade. So if you have to run a fade route and it's an MOR, that means mandatory outside release. Some people call it a must outside release. Mandatory outside release. Obviously, when he's outside shade and you have to run like a dig route, or maybe you got to run like a post route, whatever it is, you would just attack him off the line, take the inside release, and go. Even on a fade route, if it wasn't an MOR, what you would do is you would just attack him, take the inside release, and you would try to stack. If you force the outside release, this DB's job when he is outside leverage, do not get beat to the outside. So he could get hands, he could squeeze it to the sideline and disrupt the entire route, not giving the quarterback any space for us to throw him open. So this is a release that you can use on that MOR fade when you have that outside shade coverage, because I know a lot of you guys see that. So this is honestly just something called a jab release. It is with your inside foot, is with your front foot. It is something that can get this DB to just freeze for a second so you have some kind of space to the outside to make this play happen. So you're out of your stance. Literally, this is probably the quickest step to the inside that you can do, but selling this move with your upper body is super important. Because anytime you got to think of this goes for any type of press example. Even the last example was Stephon Diggs. A DB in press, his eyes are supposed to be where? He's supposed to be watching our hips. So if I can sell this thing with my hips, sell it with my upper half, even when I'm giving a release that I guess you could say is not technically correct, he's only doing this because it's an MOR, you could still get separation. So it's the quickest jab step to the inside that you can do. You're literally picking this foot up and stepping out with it. Almost like that split release where your front foot steps out and your back foot steps up. But in this case, your back foot doesn't step up. It's just a quick pop to the inside. But you see where his hips are, where his shoulders are, where his eyes are. Everything looks like he's going just quick to the inside right now. And that's something that could get that DB to hesitate, maybe be flat, whatever the case may be, and help us get a little bit of separation to the outside, even when the DB is outside leverage. Guys, if it's not an MOR, in this case, I recommend doing that like wide step release, right? But if it is an MOR, we got to give him something. We can't just take off and go run because he will get hands. He will carry us to the sideline. Let's give him something that might keep him honest. It might. I'm not saying that this is going to work perfectly every time, but if you sell it enough, think of it like you want your belly button to go to the opposite of where you are running. We want to run to the outside, so I want my belly button to go like I'm running a slant. Keep those toes forward, step quick, so we could drive out of this thing and go. So that's a perfect example of this jab release here. Let's watch the thing again, full speed one more time. So if you have a mandatory outside release fade and you have outside shade press, that is a great release to use. All right, so now, next example we're going to be going over is a slant route, but it's going to be like kind of a backside slant route or maybe an RPO slant route. So an RPO slant route is where the quarterback is here. He's got the running back. They do this zone read fake, and they're probably reading a linebacker to the inside. Linebacker crashes on the zone read. We got a slant right there in that window. So as a wide receiver, when I have that scenario, or maybe I'm backside on a play, maybe I'm running a 5-yard in and the quarterback is working a concept backside where he's reading 1 to 2 to 3, and then you're the 4th read backside at 5 yards. So you got to, honestly, with your releases, you have to time up your releases with the play. If you're a first read on a slant route where the quarterback is taking one step and then throwing, you can't do this release. We're going to give you a release in a second for that specific scenario, but this is something called a slide release, or almost like a hesitation slide release, if you will. So let's watch what Rice does here. He comes off the ball, slides to the outside, gets a crossover, and then is able to win on that slant. But you see how it's a slower tempo. Guys, if we come off the ball and do this type of release in every single scenario, quarterback's going to be looking my way, he's going to see me still working the route, and then he's going to move on, right? He's got to be looking like at a zone read, like we said, reading that linebacker. You don't want to get to that window too fast because maybe a middle linebacker could jump and play this thing. So we take our time with our release. We time it up with the play. So what's the technique of this release? So you see, what's that first thing that he does with his back foot? I talked about this in the Stephon Diggs release. He does this kick step, because that kick step is a way for you to load up your hips. You kind of dip into your front leg, and it's a way to create some energy and explosion. Because on this slide release, we are trying to make it look like that slide and go release. I'm sure you guys have all probably seen that before. Either Justin Jefferson has done it, Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams. They do this little skip, DB sits inside, and then we take off and run. So maybe Rice has done that before. Maybe he's shown that on film before. All great wide receivers know how to pair their releases together and make their releases look somewhat similar. So he does this kick step behind his front foot, right? So he kicks, and then he does this little shuffle to the outside. He goes right, left, and then throws a jab to the outside. So you see what this DB does. You see how he shuffles to the outside because he's expecting Rice, again, bigger wide receiver, probably a good red zone threat. When he slides to the outside, he's thinking, oh, I'm not going to get beat on this fade. So if you make your release look the same when you have to run a slant that's slower developing, guess what? We can get a lot of separation if this DB is undisciplined, and that's a wide open throw for the quarterback. So a slide release, a hesitation slide release, hesitation skip, however you want to think of it, is a great thing to use on a slant when it's maybe RPO or backside. So let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. Great job sliding to the outside, giving a move, and then working his way on that slant. So now you might be wondering, well, why would he attack to the outside if he has to run an inside breaking route like a slant, right? Now, again, when a DB is lined up inside shade, like he is in this example, and like he was in the last example, his goal is to not give up the slant. That's why he's lined up inside shade for a reason. He usually doesn't have help to the inside. He's trying to force you to his other help, which is the sideline. If you run out of bounds, you're not doing the play any good, and the DB did his job. He's trying to cut down as much field space from you as possible. So what if you're a first read slant, and let's say you can't threaten him with that slide and go fade route. Let's say you're a first read slant, and you got to get to the window right now. Something you could use is something called a diamond release. Now, the reason why they call this a diamond release is because it looks like a diamond. When you draw a diamond, you see how I'm here, how you draw, like you see how it's like these two angles are like a 45. You are running at pretty much a 45-degree angle. It's not a perfect 45, but you're essentially running at a 45 at this DB's outside shoulder, outside hip for 3 steps as hard as you can to try to get him to open up to a deep fade. And that's what this wide receiver is able to do effectively here. So he comes off the ball, full speed, see how that DB commits his hips, and then we're able to win. And it's a faster paced release. Guys, you have to understand that your releases need to have some kind of pace to them. It cannot be the same pace over and over and over again because DBs eventually start to pick up on that. You got to have maybe 5 to 6 different releases that you really like using, you're comfortable using, and you got to know when to use them. That's part of the reason why we're doing this video. I want to explain to you guys the technique behind releases, obviously, but I also want to explain when to use these releases so you guys know how actually to apply them. There's a lot of receivers just know the technique. They can do all this stuff all day long, but they get into a game and they freeze up because they don't know when to actually use it. So when he comes off the ball, let's check his first step, right? And what does he do with his back foot? You see how he does this little kick step with his back foot. First step, 1, right? His hips, shoulders are committed, running hard. He's running in full stride. He's gaining ground. Now on this break, he kind of breaks down and drops his hips. That's okay. On this, obviously, I would prefer you to cut off of one foot. I would prefer, like, if he was doing these steps, it would be right, left, and he would cut off of his right foot, which would be the third one. But it's not the end of the world if you drop your hips. Sometimes guys have an easier time getting out of the break like this and don't waste any movement. And it's easier to do something called a throw by, where you swat the DB on the back of his shoulder or the back of his hip with this release, because that's what you have to do on this release. When you attack his outside shoulder and hip, you're obviously running close to him. So if you just try to break and he has hands on you, he could easily recover and might even get away with a hold right there, because again, this is within 5 yards. You don't get a lot of those calls, okay? So diamond release is great to use when you're a first read. Quarterback needs to get it out quick. Remember, we're attacking his outside shoulder and outside hip for 3 hard steps, swatting him by and getting separation on the slant. We never want to force the inside release on this. I know some of you are thinking, well, why couldn't I just give a move and then take an inside release, like a quick jab? Remember, this guy's goal is to stop the inside release. So if you force the inside, He's going to get hands, 100% will get hands. And he will do something called keep his leverage, right? He will take a leverage step with his inside foot, prevent that inside release, and your slant will be all the way over here rather than staying on the platform of how it was drawn up or staying on the path of how it was drawn up. So that's a great release there by that wide receiver on that slant. Okay, so now next release we're going to be showcasing here is from Calvin Ridley. Now, this is, again, from another switch stance position. So remember, that stance switch is either for steps on the route. So if he had to run like a two-step slant, maybe it was like a three-step out route, something of that nature, right? Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that could really, give the DB a tell, like, hey, every time he switches his stance, he runs one of two routes. So again, offenses are creative. They'll have receivers do that in different situations and different things to mix it up. It's not super predictable like what you're thinking. Guys will mix this up all the dang time to keep this guy guessing. But again, it's also for press releases. So this is a release that you could use from honestly any stance. Doesn't have to be from a stance switch, but it's called the split release, right? So a split release, we briefly mentioned this earlier, but I want you to watch how quickly Calvin Ridley gets into this split release. So he splits his feet, freezes that DB, is able to get the outside release, and then get separation on a little bit of separation on this back shoulder throw. So a split release, fellas, is when your front foot goes out and your back foot goes up. I like this against DBs. Honestly, you could do it against a DB in any leverage. I personally like it when he's head up because it's a great way to react off of him. Now, you see how when Ridley does this, he kind of goes like, it's almost like he steps, like that outside foot really isn't down yet. Honestly, like it's like kind of briefly touching the ground. He probably knows that he's going to be taking this outside release here because this DB starts to shade to the inside a little bit. He gives away his leverage, right? So he does this split release. Front foot goes out, back foot goes up. Both feet make contact at the same time. DB shades a little bit to the inside, shows that he's trying to take away the inside. We got to run this fade route. Okay, cool. I'm in a balanced position where I could just take off and go run this outside release. Now, let's say, for example, it wasn't a fade route. Let's say, for example, it was like a dig. On a dig, you could take an inside release or an outside release. So let's say you do this split, back foot comes up, front foot goes out, DB's head up. So you split, right? And this is, I call this a position of balance. You have a good pad level position, pretend like you're standing underneath a small doorway. You have a good forward lean with your pad level in case he gets hands, but both feet are in the grass at the exact same time. Let's say the DB jumps to the outside. What could you do? You could put the brakes on with the outside foot and take the inside release. Say he jumps inside, put the brakes on with the inside foot, take the outside. That's the beauty of the split release because you could go either way. So that's textbook there from Calvin Ridley's plays thing. Again, full speed one more time. So split release is a great release to use, fellas, when you have that head up press coverage DB, and you could get separation on it with an inside release or an outside release.